remember John Dennys here. He was both a very jolly, a very imaginative man. And before I get on to saying a little bit about the special person from Los Angeles, I'd like to draw something of an analogy between this kind of atmosphere and this kind of audience and this kind of special place. I've been spending the last few days explaining to our 2 or 3 Los Angeles visitors what it is that makes this place run and why the trajectory of it as a place of concern with the state of the art is rather different from anywhere else. It is to do with its unpredictability, and I think again John Dennys, as a jolly and as an imaginative man, would have understood this, would have agreed with me, I'm sure. It has a curious mode of procedure whereby just at the precise moment when a certain set of ideas or a certain syndrome or a certain style or a certain manner of discussing or making architecture is really getting going, it gets bored and takes off in an unexpected direction somewhere else. And this is its great and amazing strength, and it is just as much so right now. I have noticed, and if one looks at the special student work that's going on at this precise moment, the most exciting student work is totally different from what one might have expected a year or 2 back. It's totally different from the kind of style of architecture that has already become the mainstream and that is discussed still in most places, not only on the East Coast but in the rest of Europe, and has been very successfully dealt with in that way. Just at the moment when this architecture, for which there was a battle, let us say 10 or 8 years ago, has become accepted in the polytechnics, this place is off in another direction which is very difficult to describe, and I foresee that in 5 years' time people will not be making beautiful drawings at all. It will be quite different. They will not be making cardboard pediments. They will not be interested in history. But this is my own personal interpretation. I suspect I'm right, and I think John Dennys would have understood the point. Now, there is a curious parallel between this and the state of Los Angeles, because it had interested my generation 2 or 3 or 4 generations before me. But I think that by the time of the late 50s and 60s, it had been conveniently compartmentized into being an interesting place, yes, but a little provincial, a place where perhaps, yes, Wright and some minor Viennese figures had gone and made things, and it was relaxed of a certain kind, Eames, yes, and all of that. But let's face it, the real action takes place in Europe and in particular in New York. And just at the moment when this could be conveniently said, something happened. I would put the date at maybe 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. Suddenly it took off in an unexpected direction, just as happens in the AA. And the particular reason might be said something to do with the climate, something to do with its similar attitude of what the hell that often one finds in the AA. And of course not least to do with the personal history of Frank Gehry himself. And this is my third parallel, that if one looks at the buildings of Frank Gehry, one can find in the Slide Library and other places, the evidence of one's eyes, a very good, succinct, straight, dare I say, straight architect, a good architect, who would, one predict, have his place in the West Coast Sea and continue to make good buildings. And then suddenly he took off, suddenly something happened, and once again there's this extraordinary moment of magic, and I'm myself delighted that therefore this evening one is concerned with several things. One is concerned with Frank and his work, but also I think the exhibition that we have here at this moment of the Los Angeles Now, an exhibition of 19 firms, most of them people who Frank has supported and befriended and needled and perhaps irritated and encouraged and formal terms, certainly inspired. It is a curious place, and I won't warble on about this too much, but I feel very strongly that the psychology of Los Angeles is very, very similar to the psychology of London. It makes both of those cities act and react in a totally different way from, let us say, Paris or New York. They are private and unpredictable and indulgently naughty and the haven of the creative eccentric. And that is what makes them similar, not any physicality of formal things. And just as some of us felt a tremendous bond of spirit with Vienna, let us say 12 or 15 years ago, in more recent times there is a similar instinctive bond of spirit between those curious guys in the next room there and London. I would also like to take this opportunity of introducing to London Eric Moss, who is the most surprising, and again I'm about to make that hand gesture, but I think I've made it enough already this evening, is the most surprising of the slightly younger Los Angeles architects. Each of his strange houses is more bizarre and yet gets to be stronger and more assured than the next. And he will be talking here at 5:30 tomorrow evening. I'm also amused, and this is purely after the event stuff, I'm amused that he appears before Hundertwasser, but that's another conversation. And I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking my co-organizer of the exhibition, catalogue and so on, Barbara Goldstein, who did a marvellous thing at the right moment. She went back from the East Coast to London and then back to Los Angeles and restarted the magazine Arts and Architecture, which in that earlier moment of interest in Los Angeles had been a key organ of the spirit of that town. And she has gone back and has done a very difficult thing, as we all know, which is to get a serious and at the same time sophisticated magazine to actually take a creative role. On Friday, all of us will be debating with each other the whole issue of the Los Angeles scene. Finally then, to return to Frank Gehry and his extraordinary work. I think that everybody will carry in their minds the vision of Gehry's own house. And it amuses me to ponder on how few architects actually have the balls to live in a house that they have designed. Very few, certainly in this country, hardly anybody in this room, even if they have the money, bothers to wear their heart on their sleeves and then live in it. Well, he's done it, to the annoyance or amusement of his neighbours, maybe. I don't know. And it's an extraordinary set of buildings, but I think when you look, I'll finish on an issue of a building that he may or may not, I don't know what he's going to talk about this evening, he may or may not talk very much about the Loyola Law School. In some respects, it is, at first, his straightest recent building. And then suddenly, again, I do the arm movement, he does extraordinary things at its edges, at its tentacles. Is he playing a constructivist game, we ask? Is he playing a mature, late Gehry game? Who knows? But suddenly those boring people who always like to have a packaged view of the scene and a packaged view of what is expected are thrown. And what I'm most delighted about, the generosity of this particular memorial lecture, to invite Gehry the unexpected, the person who I think will not leave any of you feeling terribly comfortable at the end of the evening. And that is directly, of course, in this tradition. Thank you.
If I'm so good, how come I'm not rich? Tell me. I'm very honored to be the John Dennys Memorial Lecturer, and very pleased to be here. I brought my family with me. That's a saga to explain sometime. As Mickey Hawes will attest, we were coming and we weren't coming, and we got measles and we didn't have measles, and we couldn't get on a plane because we didn't have passports, and then we didn't have a marriage certificate. The English are very careful about things like that, I find. I have a 3-year-old son and a 7-year-old son. They're both at a hotel with a babysitter. I invited them to come. The 7-year-old had been to 2 of my lectures before, and he said he didn't want to come. I asked him why. He said, I may fall asleep. So if you do, just snore away. I was born in Toronto, Canada, which is very British. And at the age of 11, I stood honor guard for the Duke of Kent. I don't know if everybody knows about that. So that gives me special license to come here. When I haven't spent much time here. I've been here for 2 quick trips in the past and didn't get to look at anything or meet anybody. I was just passing through and was recalled home. I'm very intimidated by London so far. Comparing it to Los Angeles, I don't know what kind of architecture I'd do if I was here. If Bedford Square out there were in Los Angeles, it would be the best urban architecture in Los Angeles, I think. Is that true? You can travel around Los Angeles for a great deal of time and not get to see any great works of architecture. You have to really look hard and find Schindler and Neutra and Wright and others. My work obviously grows out of that milieu. I left Canada when I was 17 and grew up in architecture in Los Angeles. Although I've spent a lot of time in the East at school and have worked in France for a year in the early 60s. But I'm a Los Angeles architect, and I think it shows in the work. Jim Sterling came to visit a couple of years ago, and after a few drinks, he said to me that he wanted to make a deal that I should stay in Los Angeles and do my work, and he would go home to London and stay here and do his work, because he obviously understood England and didn't understand as well the States and Germany. And so we shook on it, and I've kept my part of the bargain. And guess where he is tonight? The carpetbagger. A lot of my early study and time was spent in working with artists or in art. I started out in fine arts. And there has been a lot of talk recently about art and architecture, and whether architecture is an art, and et cetera, et cetera. And I would say that I found out in a panel discussion with Mary Miss, a sculptor from the States, that the real difference between art and architecture is that architecture has a toilet associated with it. So that is the best definition I've heard. I don't consider it much of an issue. I don't really care to call it art or whatever. I think architecture is a heavy enough trip already. It's loaded with meanings, and to laden it with the burdens of whether or not it's an art, it doesn't matter. It is or it isn't. We do have the problem in our work of dealing with clients, and I think it's an art. Indeed, there's an art to dealing with clients, and maybe that's what the art is. I'm aware lately, and we all are, that architecture has garnered more press and more time and more exposure than ever. It's become more exciting. People they're making and breaking heroes daily, and it's very open. It's opened up, and I think it's a good time for students to pick and choose and learn and try things and explore ideas and explore themselves. At the same time, it's ironic that there are premonitions of disaster and all kinds of scary things about nuclear things, which I know are very much on the mind of people in Britain. I've heard, and I've been here 24 hours, and I've heard 3 programs about the nuclear problem. And it's something that's far greater and far more, a far greater import to all of us than just making little buildings in the corner. But and I think that those issues have tended to cloud and create some confusion in our architectural world. I'm not bringing you a major polemic or a stand. I've been searching for personal vocabulary. I believe we are commentators. In that sense, we react and we express in architecture our views relating to politics, economics, people. We've traditionally learned from history. It's nothing new to architects to use historical references in their work, and it's only gained more importance because Charlie Jencks has called our attention to it as a school. I'm not just kidding. I think that for me, creativity is a childlike experience. It's a kind of questioning. It's a playpen. It's a exploring with colleagues in the office ideas, trying things, and accidentally bumping into things. It's not, and taking those accidents and working with them. And it's something I continue to do. I think that sharing that childlike exploration with clients sometimes gets you in trouble, but I started out as a very left-wing, politically, I guess that's from my own background, and I spent many years in city planning and in activist activities politically, and finally came to the realization that that was a personal kind of treadmill, that I was wasting a lot of time. So I finally decided that just doing what I do best was more effective. At least it was more satisfying, and maybe it's self-indulgent. I hope not. I don't consider the work as precious. I try not to get too hung up in the preciousness of the act of architecture, making architecture. I think and so I tend to make light of it as I talk about it. I'm very serious about what I'm doing, but I don't want to lay that on everybody. I've come to a kind of notion of sculptural idealism, whatever that is, but it relates to what I think I can do. What I can do is to make individual objects and place them next to each other. And since I have been fascinated with 3 dimensions since birth, since childhood, I like the idea of placing objects next to each other and exploring the spatial relationships. And I have been studying some of the houses, the basics of a house, and tearing apart the house and looking at the room as an individual space, as an individual object, and then placing these individual objects next to each other and making a whole house. Unfortunately, one of the best examples of it in my work is a house that is partially built in Los Angeles at the foot of a hill on top of which Charles Jencks has a house that he's building. That house is not going to be completed by me. I just heard the other day that the client, we had a little bit of a tiff with each other, and we fired each other with mutual understanding. It was over money, actually. Something like $5,000 stood between us and Valhalla. So that client, I just heard, signed on a new architect to take this house, which is very minimalist in nature. It has each room is a separate building, and they're simple boxes, and they're very basic elements, and they're separated by space so that the whole lot around them is part of the house. Now, I guess it's some kind of psychological blocking or whatever. I left the slides for that project. I will try to describe it in more detail. The big question I always get from American audiences has to do with order. And I guess when you look at my work, you tend to think of it as disorder, and I don't see it that way. So I think order is in everything we do. We can't escape the order of gravity, economics, time, budgets, human scale, politics, nature, whatever. It's so much a part of everything you do, you just can't escape it, and try as you will to make crazy time, you can't, I don't think, really go veer too far out of the ordering devices that are already in our world. Finally, I have an office that's a very traditional practice. We do working drawings and build models and deal with clients and budgets and tight time schedules, and we have lawsuits for leaking things, and we have now even got computer printouts of our checking, and what else? We have all kinds of all the gimmicks are there, even in a small office of about 12 people. The slides I'm going to show you represent some kind of growth. I didn't bring everything I've ever done, although in organizing these slides on the plane and a few days before I left, and then today, I think I've deorganized them and to some ridiculous point, and they seem, as I looked at them in the run-through, everything seems foreign to me, so I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I want to, in most cases, since this is a primarily student audience, I intend to try and share with you some of my own struggles in these projects, and in some cases, some of the failures or imminent failures in one. The only thing that keeps me going is the understanding, is knowledge that everything has been done before, and so I don't have to worry. We're not going to fail in that sense. Let's start with the pictures. I don't know how this room looks at. I think that we need a competition and a budget for a new lecture hall for the John Dennys Memorial Lecture. These are pictures never seen before by anybody except my mother. In my 5th year of architectural school, on the left-hand side, I did a house which was partly built, but it was designed in a sort of pseudo-Japanese style. I think that the Japanese style is a very prevalent idea in Western United States. I think that there is a heavy influence of Oriental architecture in the Los Angeles region. On the right-hand side is the first building I did, which is also in that style. It's a cabin in the mountains. Now I have to push these. On the left-hand side is a building I did in 1962, which had obvious historical references, even then. It was early something or other. And on the right-hand side is a discussion with Peter Eisenman where he told me I was going wrong and set me straight. This is the first building that I would create any interest, and Rainer Banham was the first person to recognize my work and publish this building in a book about Los Angeles. And this is a studio for a graphics designer, a very fine graphics designer. He lives in the right-hand side, and the left-hand side is his studio. And as soon as the building was built, he bought himself a pool table and quit graphics design. And then this is to just flex my muscles and show you that I have built some big buildings, and that I learned how to do this stuff the hard way, not just making pretty little drawings and then getting big projects like my friend Michael does. This is an 18-story brick pile in Baltimore. And then at the same time, I worked on some office buildings, and became very involved with the issue of indirect light and developed systems for that and so on. This was my first encounter or collaboration with an artist in a building. It was the artist Ron Davis, whose studio this is, and it was designed, grew out of my involvement. I forgot to say that I spent a lot of time in the Gruen office in Los Angeles and had a heavy dose of commercial architectural experience where one designs buildings as shells, and then tenants move in and make the buildings what they will on the inside. I took that strategy and used it in the case of this house and built as large as possible a shape, a space that had flexibility and open-ended in the sense that the interiors could be done after and rooms could be laid out after. And so this was a trapezoidal type of shaped building that grew out of Ron Davis's interest in perspective. His paintings had to do a lot with perspective. I was very fascinated with his interest in that, and coupled with my own interest in that, I made this building, and it related to that little valley that goes up. And on the right-hand side, you see the play of perspective. That left-hand corner of the building is 15 feet high, and this one is 30 feet high, and it's not as elongated as it looks. At the time, I designed it as two opposing objects, a house and a studio. The top one was never built, just that one was built. But I saw them as relating objects to each other, which is an issue that comes up again. Inside, it was started as a fairly empty box, and then added to a staircase joining a loft, and then added to 3 or 4 rooms. The idea was that as it evolved, it would get filled up, and then at some point in time, it would just be torn back down and rebuilt. There are some of his paintings in the picture. On the right-hand slide, you see it at the second phase before these rooms were built in relation to that staircase. I was accepting in all of this work the idea that I couldn't afford or wasn't going to be able to get anything more than rough carpentry, that I was going to have to deal with a rough carpentry aesthetic, and I tried consciously to use that as a decorative element, which also continues through the work. This is the left-hand side is the first large building in '67, pavilion in near Washington for music, and it was this building that it was built for the Washington Symphony, which went broke immediately after this building was built, and it had to be used for a rock concert facility. And because of the crowd control, 2 chain link fence double chain link fence was put up all around it, much to my horror, because obviously I was in my alto period at this time and not interested in chain link. Then this second pavilion in Concord, California came along, and I knew by then that I had to put chain link around it, so I was ready for them. And then this is Charlie's heard this one before, but bear with me. This is a bank job in California, and it started out, it says something about my own process in dealing with clients and architecture. It started out as a box in which these corners were not cut out like they are on this model. It was a box, and inside the box was this house, and the notion was that we financed the American dream. That was the message I was getting across. And I didn't have a good handle on the costs of a bank. I hadn't done one for a long time. And so I costed out the box, and it was too expensive, and so we cut out these corners so that to cut down the cost, and that was still too expensive, and so we cut out the middle. And we were still $20,000 short. And so they make a lot of chain link all over the world. Every place I go, it's there, and it's used inevitably, and it's used without any ill feelings, it seems, inevitably. People put it around their tennis courts and around their garages and around their everythings. And enough chain link is, so much of it's made. It's just enormous, the quantity of it's made, and it's absorbed by the culture, and it's inevitably put around one's buildings. And maybe that just happens to me, but it bothered me, and so I tried to figure out what there was about this material that was decent and interesting, and I started to do experiments with it, and found references to it in art. Some of the artists have used it, building cages, and there's obvious reference to it as a fabric in the Bob Irwin's work, using scrim material, which showed some ways of handling fabric architecturally. And I used it in a small office building for Toyota in Baltimore, where in the sales department, where we made the walls look kind of like the mountains, and we made the chain link look like clouds hanging over the mountains. That's what that's supposed to look like. And then I designed a beach house for somebody who was very security conscious when he came to me, and said that he wanted me to be very careful and he didn't want to spend a lot of money, but he wanted very much to have a beach house that could be totally enclosed and people kept out during the week when he was not there. So I used the chain link as both a decorative sculptural element, a sun visor, layered it and made sculptural shapes with the shadow patterns, and got very excited about it in this building. The owner sold the lot with the plans to somebody who called me and said they were going to build it exactly as I had designed it, except for one minor change. You can imagine what the change was. So we didn't do that one, actually. Another project that in that time, right after the Ron Davis house, on a lot in Malibu, hillside, the owner was an arch environmentalist, did not want to disturb the land, so we proposed a box built on stilts of telephone poles run into the ground so the earth could go below it. And because it was at an angle, I made 3 levels inside, but the box started to look like a shoebox tilted in perspective, and at a certain point it looked like it was sliding down the hill. And so I continued with that idea and pursued it further and built the chain link fence as a skin, an after image that so that it enhanced that idea of sliding down the hill. And this is around the Concord Pavilion. As I said, I knew about chain link by then, and we made that dark line on the crater is a chain link fence, and it's an inevitable chain link fence. And then the ticket building is an intentional chain link. The city of Los Angeles wanted to build a marine biology museum, and in their wisdom came to me. And they wanted it, the city had some notions about a Spanish colonial building for this project. Cities in California are very interested in the Spanish heritage, and rightfully so. But they took me to this lot here where there was asphalt already, and there was chain link all around already. And since I'm a contextualist by nature, and there's boats there already, you see, so we made a chain link extravaganza. And by the way, it functions as a security fence as well. So it has those, it does do that. These nice pictures were taken by Tim Street Porter. Most of the pictures I have are taken by Tim, who was, as many of you know, from these parts. He's also in Los Angeles today. This, the idea of making individual buildings and grouping them and was prevalent in the thinking was in my mind at this time. The little building with the glass is the office part of it, and it uses the symbolism of an office building. Other than that, it's just a series of boxes knit together by this fascinating material. In doing our research, we found that the people in marine museums like to see the fish in tanks and darkened rooms, and then we found going behind that there was a lot of interesting stuff going on, and so we tried to combine in our project both of those ideas. So there's a tunnel in which you can see the fish in the regular way, and then on the back side the marine biologists at work. And it was a way of extending the program, and I think that's a responsibility of architects to do that, to move in on the program, question it, and not just do the what was given to you. The interior of the old museum already had chain link on the inside, so again I just took that idea and used it inside here, and made all of the inside display as fences, and which hung the information on it with bolts on masonite. So it was an anti-design kind of move on my part. The original design for this museum, which wasn't built, was done by Charles Eames clone, and it was very overly detailed, and there were only room out of the budget for about a third of the exhibits that we were able to do by using just this kind of anti-design technique. And at night I shone indirect light indirectly against nothing, and it worked. And then I've had sojourns into funny materials like cardboard, and made a room at Bloomingdale's in 1972, the one on the right, in which everything is cardboard. We made a log cabin room, and the floors are cardboard squares, and the bed is cardboard, and on the left the table with a 1,300-pound elephant, and when the picture was taken, the elephant reared up and broke the thing. So there is this was for Life magazine, and so they subsequently took a picture of me jumping on it to replace the elephant. This was about a year of excitement working with this material and exploring its properties, and it was very successful at Bloomingdale's. It was selling like hotcakes in '72, and it totally screwed up my head. I didn't know whether I was coming or going, whether I was an architect, a furniture designer, or what. And I was less secure about myself as an architect at that time, I guess, and I just stopped it all. I said, stop, shut it down, closed up the showroom at Bloomingdale's, created a lot of lawsuits and a lot of angry people, and I just went away and went back to work on my buildings. Last year, Bloomingdale's resurrected this stuff and put it on display again for a short run, and nobody wanted to buy it this time. Because of the success in '72, and because it was so devastating to me personally in terms of what it did to my life, because I like to work on furniture, I just kept working on furniture. I kept designing and making pieces that I was sure nobody would like, nobody would buy, and that's what these are. And nobody buys them. And they look very precarious, which is an issue I was playing with, and they're very solid and they're very comfortable. It's probably the only comfortable architect-designed furniture ever made. I won a competition in Santa Monica using these kind of drawings and models for a large downtown redevelopment project. And this was a dream, and it wasn't completely designed. This was just a rough study. Then, after we won the competition, reality set in, and it became a typical shopping center in downtown, and the hotels, offices, apartments, all those nice things that were going to make it function and make it exciting in the Jane Jacobs sense disappeared, and I was left with 2 department stores, 2 parking garages, and one of those malls, one of those long things. And I was able to, because of the tightness of the site, was able to work with it and create courtyards, as you see in the plan, in each street, and break down the scale of the project by making separate buildings out of the courtyard, the department store, and the garages. And that was the strategy, and then inside the 3 traditional courtyards were attempted to make as 3 separate buildings inside the new building. There's an aerial view of it in its location. The chain link reared its ugly head again as a screen, and I think in a way probably the best use of it I've made, using it as a fabric and hanging it from a rail so that it's free of those posts and connections and things that make it look like fencing. We used a lighter, 2 colors of chain link, and sort of appliqued the letters to the white letters to the blue chain link, and made that kind of sewed them on, so to speak, like sewing by example, and got that interesting effect with it. Inside, it's a reasonable space. I don't consider this one of my best projects. I think it's one of the biggest things I've done. It's very difficult to overcome some of the pressures that are on one in doing one of these projects, and certainly the small shops just can't. They're not bad enough to be like the little streets that grew up and sort of had tons of signs and no sign control, and somehow over time get kind of a character to them. These are sort of done by design and by their chains, and there's a can design, and they're repeated, and then there are the overlays of design controls by the developer, using old criteria, I say, that sort of make it all very polite, and it loses a lot of the character. But we were able to open the ends like the gallerias in Europe and make it more like a public street. The building in the center that was supposed to have been a different change of material, I didn't win that one, and it became sheetrock like the rest of it. And then we did one of the stores and broke some of the sign rules, but one of the kids worked in my office who had worked at Bob Stern's, and he came back with this pediment stuff. I always felt that the little stick buildings that are built in Los Angeles look better before they're covered up than after, so that, and I was interested in the immediacy that one sees in painting, the feeling that you see a painting years and years later and has kind of a feeling that it was just painted a minute ago. And that idea interested me, and I took my cue from this stuff and designed a house that looked like some hurricane had gone through, but this house was not built, fortunately, so we don't know. I was accused, you know, when architects from the States travel, we bring our own critics with us. We're very classy. So we brought John Pasteur and Barbara Goldstein with us, and they told me yesterday that I never show, that a lot of my work is hidden and that I don't show it, and that, so I wanted to show you this. I had brought this with already. I intended to do it anyway. This is never been seen by anybody except my mother also. This house preceded my own house. It's a spec house. We bought the thing that's painted blue and built a new house, the thing that's painted white, around it. And this is all there is of it. But I think if you look at the work I do find, looking back, that I've tried things several times in sort of the projects that I don't show a lot of, they're sort of trial sketches for me, as this one was. I suppose when Peter was talking about the turning point in my career, he was talking about my own house, and I've heard it said that the major change came about after I met my present wife, and she's sitting in the audience, and I think probably that was a factor in the changes in my work. This is she found this little house on the right. It was nothing special. It had been moved here from another site 20-some years ago. It sat on a corner, and we bought it with no idea of what we were going to do, except that we were going to do something to it. I felt it necessary to express myself. I found that there was a side yard, additional space we could build on the side, and I became interested in the idea of building a house around it like I had done in the previous house, and in this case playing off the house inside, trying to make it appear that the house, the existing house, was never touched or tampered with, and it was left inside, and then we built this new form around it, and you could collage this wall and windows and new pieces with the existing house, and always be aware of the existing house. So that's where it started. This is the street it's on, and I show the pictures for some kind of contextual, because if you haven't been there, you don't realize that we abut an apartment house neighborhood in which everybody is built out right to the street, and our house was the only one that wasn't. So that the building of this wall, which people think is an affront to the neighbors, is really quite in the spirit of what's there already. And the only question, I guess, of any morality, if one has, is the use of the corrugated metal as a finished material. You can see the use of the windows in through the wall. So I wasn't trying to cut myself away from the neighborhood. I was trying to make it possible for people to see the old house, see some of the features that were on the site, like that old cactus that was there for years and nobody ever saw it. And they thought I'd imported it, but now that I have it framed, and this is the kitchen window struggle. I had a fantasy that I explored here, that as I built the new house around the old house, that some ghost of cubism who was haunting the old place got stuck inside and was trying to crawl out. And I became fascinated with that idea, and I built endless models and endless drawings trying to accomplish that phenomenon. And there it is. And if you stand dead center across the road at night, it looks like it's crawling out. Inside, I learned a lot about reflection from artist Larry Bell, who was in Los Angeles for a long period. And in the Ron Davis house, a lot of the reflections, because of the trapezoidal shape and the way the skylights, there were a lot of accidental reflections that were quite amazing to me. And so I used that, in this case, more intentionally. Although I couldn't predict exactly what I was going to see, I did have some sense of the quality of these reflections and did try to compose them. People that see the house think that it was just sort of knocked together and that I didn't design it except on the site. It was a happening and was built with my involvement. I didn't pick up a hammer myself. I've never done that. I don't work on the jobs. But we did in the office build sections full size of some of the more complicated joints and gave them to the carpenter. So that and then endless models were built of all the corners and complicated parts that were difficult to show. The chain link stuff on top, 4 or 5 contractors came to the house to bid the job and left, saying they couldn't deal with that kind of stuff. But one guy came, I gave him a beer, and we became friends. And he's built actually all the chain link. He did the Santa Monica Place chain link. He's gone on to do all of our chain link work. And he thought he had a career until I told him I'm not interested in the material anymore. Never will use it again. This, after living there for a long time, is my favorite part of the house. It's I slipped the glass past the corner to make it appear that this cube was rotating. I was interested in the corner being of some movement, and it does some fascinating things. It appears as a reflection sometimes, and it does, to me, seem to make the place the cube rotate. And there you can see that on a clear day you can see the old house inside very clearly. And yet, none of the privacy of the house is compromised, because all of the windows are above 6 feet. And so that if you walk down this street and look at the other houses with all their little windows and all the blinds pulled, you don't get any sense of involvement with your neighbors. Whereas here, I've sort of let them into the house in a way. And I don't think they see in too much. I haven't seen any cues at night watching us. Occasionally somebody walks up on this little green wall and peeks in the window, and I have a life-size statue of an artist friend, Billy L. Bankston, sitting in a corner that I had for a show I did for an installation of his. And when they look in the window and see that statue staring at them, they get kind of scared. And So that statue has become the protector. The floor of the kitchen is asphalt paving, like parking lot, and it has 2 drains, and the windows do leak, and the water comes down on the floor and goes in the drains. And I did expose the framing using the standard framing and peeled away the framing of the old house so that there's a layering of the old framing is there with the new, and that gives it a feeling that I can't describe, but it adds to the intensity of whatever you feel when you're in there. The chain link started out as guardrails for the kids, of course. That was the functional reason. And then they sort of became more megalomaniac. And people pass by occasionally and say, "Do we have monkeys living up there?" But you can see here from the kitchen looking out the corner that it's really a tree house. And then up on top, that's a deck that comes off the bedroom. And so it's a very comfortable, it's not as crazy as it all seems. It's very comfortable place to live. I became fascinated with windows, and on the right I just took a hammer and knocked it out and glued a piece of glass on that wall with epoxy, and it never leaks. And then I made a medicine cabinet for the children's room. An artist friend did that. And it's a window with a mirror in it. And it's adjustable for different kids' heights. And then I couldn't resist making a chain link floor that you can walk on, so that's outside the bedroom. And the kids open those doors and run through here. And they've been raised in this house. I don't know what they're going to be like when they grow up. As you walk in the entrance door and look up, which nobody ever does, but if they did, that's what they'd see. At the same time, I was commissioned to do a house by the beach in Venice. Can you focus it? So I bring these pictures to show you context, because I know that that was one of the things Jim Sterling and I had a lot of discussions about, is how do you build in this place? What do you relate to? What do you... And it's an interesting point, because there isn't much there to relate to. There's this nice old brick thing, but we had to get higher than it so we could see the ocean. So we prevailed upon the city to let us put part of it down lower and part of it up higher so that we have a little view of the ocean. The heights all relate. The height is the same height as the white building, so they didn't give us any special dispensation. It's made in the corrugated and using the same wood structure as my house. This is more megalomaniac about that structure in the sense that the wood studs is more pervasive in here, and it's kind of like living in a trellis. The right-hand side is a section. The front is a rental unit and completely separate. And the back is a garage on the ground floor, and then 3 spaces, living spaces. And they borrow a little bit of the roof of the front unit, so the courtyard all relates to the rear part of the building. And you can see I was using solar energy like a good boy. The back of it is looks kind of like a five-story trailer. The idea that I used here on the windows is that I did not frame the windows in the structure. We didn't put headers and blocked for windows. We built it all balloon framing, consistent through. Ordered the windows, and the idea was then we could place them and refine the views on the job. And that was the intention. Actually, the windows are placed exactly where they were in the model, so that idea didn't bear fruit. It was cheaper to build that way, though. This one, by the time I got to this one, we only had one leak in this skylight. So we ironed the bugs out, and we were down to one leak, which we've been able to repair now. So it's a system of epoxy and glass that I've been evolving, and I wouldn't try it over here, but it works out there. The owner in this case participated a great deal because we only did the very early models and gave her a set of sketches and models, and then she proceeded on her own to complete it and build it. And the carpenters were the people who had worked on other of my jobs. They knew I was going to leave the studs exposed, so they went out and selected all the lumber very carefully and with quite different intention. They were trying to make it into something I hadn't intended, but it worked anyway. This, after the Ron Davis House, an idea for a Jung Institute in Los Angeles that didn't go any further than this, but the idea was to take buildings like the Ron Davis House, and this is in an industrial area, build a 12-foot wall around the lot, pave it with asphalt, hot mop it so it would hold water, and put 2 inches of water and build, I mean, I'm giving you the wrong sequence. You put the buildings on first and then the 2 inches of water, but build these sort of sculptural shapes that are out of my imagination as found objects to be used by the Jung Institute and their people to come to and take individual buildings like in the Ron Davis House and bring their own furniture and wrap it and make it their own space like people do in New York and Soho and lofts and so on. And it was that idea which I persist in, and this was the first time. And that idea continued into recently into some studies for a tract house in which each room was a separate building, and that you could design these separate objects and almost take them off a shelf and make your own still life and relate them to the site, and almost do it on a computer and buy a house on the computer and play with the forms and make it site specific. This was part of the studying for the house that I mentioned that I didn't bring the slides for, that is going to now become a Spanish house. But these were some of the studies for that. And then a small house after that for one of the lawyers from the law school asked me to do a tiny house, 1,800 square feet, on a tiny lot for he and his wife and 2 young daughters. And I don't know what the comparables in money, but this whole thing was built for $150,000 with the lot, with the architect's fees, with everything, from the whole piece. And it's not completely finished. He didn't have the whole $150,000, so we're building it in parts. But the main sections are built, which you'll see. And the idea was to build a moat, make a retaining wall that held back the hill, and create a moat so that I didn't have to waterproof that retaining wall, and then I could build the house as small as very discrete boxes, so they were very simple to comprehend by the contractor, and thereby save money. So there's a moat between them, and as you drive in, you either park in under those carports and walk up a stairway across the roof and back down below, and that's sort of a processional entry. there's a jib crane at the corner where that stair is, so that you bring the groceries in and you lower them down into the moat. The kids have who are in the bottom of the brown box, have a secret stairway up through a closet that takes them to a hatch. You can see it on the roof on the left side. And they come out into this fantasy log cabin. And then this elaborate staircase is the second exit the code requires for coming from creating a third floor. So that's how we dealt with that. There's the jib crane. See, I wasn't lying. And then this staircase goes into the parents' bedroom, and that'll be, they come in the carport and go up in it. And that staircase, it pulls up after you, so it enhances the moat idea. And we used, one of the ways we made it so cheap was using asphalt shingles. The work is now proceeding on the deck on this lower box, and the log cabin is being built in the next few weeks. But I was trying to take some simple objects and make kind of a fantasy out of it for this small family. There's the moat, and to go to the kitchen, that's the kitchen door, and it's 6 feet in the rain if it's pouring rain. We designed a canopy in case, since we'd never done this before, and it's designed but never, and it's very cheap to build, but nobody wants to build it. They like the separation. For this particular family, it serves well because they have parents that come and visit, and the small box is the kitchen, living room, dining room, so it serves as kind of a hotel room for family occasionally and gives separation. That's the master bedroom with a study loft in it. The carports are going to be made out of flat galvanized metal. And there on the right, you see the stairway that comes down. It's the entrance to the front door, which is in that green box. Another contextual piece in Venice, California. This is a pretty tough neighborhood, as you see. We were asked to design 3 artist studios that would be very inexpensive. Loft-type space, and so we made those 3 boxes. They're about 1,800 square feet each. The first floor is 9 feet high ceiling, and the second floor is 18 feet high. So there's a ability to build inside it, lofts and so on, and there are hatches to the roof so that things could be built on the roof, like in the previous project. And that was all left up to the will of the purchaser, and they would purchase each one of these as a separate building. I think I was trying to make some kind of statement about the postmodern issue, where I thought, well, you can take stairways and fireplaces, you don't have to take pediments and columns, and I suppose that's what this was about, because if you look at my sketches, I was drawing pediments and columns, and probably got self-conscious, Charlie. That bay window is a reference to a lot of apartment buildings that are built in the neighborhood that have that kind of stepped form. And the fireplace you can see is a closet for a ladder. The picture on the right was sent to Architectural Digest. They called and complained that I never send them any of my work, and I said, "You'll never publish it if I do." So I just proved it to them. The fascination between artists and architects led the New Yorkers to create some busy work for all of us, which took a lot of time, cost me a lot of money, and led to this apparition. It was a collaboration with Richard Serra. We decided to do a bridge joining the World Trade Center, which are those two verticals on the right, to the Chrysler building, which is the smaller building, which looks like this, of course. And we used the Laricolet mesh cable structure idea as the idea for the bridge, and the idea of the practicality of it being that the joining of Midtown and downtown Manhattan would be at least more practical than the Hull, England bridge, which was the most expensive bridge ever built by man, and great wisdom of the business community and the political people in Hull. I don't know, you probably know a lot more about it than I do. It was reported in the New York Times that this bridge is never used because it's too expensive and you can detour it. So we thought this would be infinitely more practical in that context. The left-hand side is the Richard Serra's portal of two 80-story steel plates, and then I was left to anchor the right-hand side, and I came up with this building that comes out of the Hudson River at a 45-degree angle and resembles a fish. That's the easiest rendering I ever made. Those lines are floors, and there's 150 of them. If you look at the Chrysler building, though, the scaling of the top of the Chrysler building is kind of fish-like. So. And then the most practical thing that came out of it for me was we then tried to imagine how you would make a skin like that in glass. And this is that attempt. So those horizontals are 12 feet apart. That represents a typical office floor. And the glass are 12-foot by 12-foot sheets of glass that are hung from bolts. And obviously the technology for all this would have to be worked out so it didn't leak. But it leads to a very interesting speculation about high-rise and curtain wall. And it nurtured sort of a fascination in me for the fish image. This is a house in New York that didn't get built, but it's existing. That's what I was given, and I was to build two apartments inside, one for a mother and a younger daughter. And so I designed it as the opposite of my house, where I built a new house around the old house. In this case, I built two new houses, or proposed to build two new houses inside in a very tiny space. And so the pink one is the mother's house and the green one is the daughter's house. And there are drawbridges and all kinds of... Each one of those has a living room and a bedroom. And then the main floor, the second floor up on the model on the right, which is this floor here, is the entertainment level, a big common living room, and then below is a swimming pool and maid's quarters and so on and so on. Because that one wasn't built, a friend of mine convinced me that we should build it somewhere else or take the idea and do something with it. And so we bought a lot in New York together, and that's this lot. And the building next to it, which is there, but which we can't do too much to except on the ground floor. And the idea is to build 6 small dwellings and create kind of a street. And this was the early model. And then it seemed so dark in there that I couldn't stand. I guess coming from California, I couldn't stand the idea of burying those things in the middle. And so I proposed that we build a bridge in the sky and build them up in the air, which is that sketch. And then that got involved with the fish again. And it degenerated finally to be pole houses, sitting 6 or 8 stories in the air, and then leaving a garden on the ground. And this is the scheme we're trying to proceed with. But since it's all our own money, and this is the most expensive way of doing it, I'm sure, we'll probably get pulled down to earth shortly. Can we change those? This is a project Charles Jencks was going to help me with. He was going to design the portal for me. It never went ahead, but it's interesting because the client asked me to design a master plan for this project in Atlanta, Georgia, and he didn't want it to look like it was all one architect. He wanted it not to look like a project, and he asked us to bring in our fancy friends from New York and ask them to help us so that we would design the master plan in phase 1, and then Graves and Moore and whatever would be asked to do the rest of it. And we didn't have much work in the office at the time, so I was damned if I was going to give it to any of those guys. So I proceeded to show them that I could design like all of them anyway. And the advantage, of course, is we could bring in some dead ones like John Nash, Adolf Loos. So it had some advantages, but never went further than this. This is the law school that Peter mentioned. It's in downtown Los Angeles. You can see near the near the core. It's in a rundown neighborhood. The plan or the program was for a building that would fit in about the size of that box. And this is on the left-hand side is the existing law school building with its parking garage, and there you see it in this photograph on the right. We started out with the idea of trying to create a campus for this law school, since it was in an area that it was detached from the main campus, which is a Jesuit college, by the way. And there was a feeling of being left out of everything, and so what we tried to do is build some kind of a campus back into this project that had something to do with the legal profession, would make the young lawyers studying here, give them some sense of pride of what they were doing, because the existing facility had absolutely none. And this is an early study showing the idea of taking the classrooms, which would have been underneath that building, the building on the left, and would have required clear spanning and extra expense. We chose to move them, take them out, put them in the center, and make them into the decoration for the project, or create this campus, which was helped us a lot in the financial planning of this project, because it allowed them to build it in phases quite easily and do fundraising on the basis of that. The board of directors of the school insisted that I take one of those buildings out, the one in the middle. They said it was one too many buildings, and so then we replaced it with a tree. And the red buildings are the new buildings, and the little building here is a chapel. The first part is completed, and it's you can see the street, you can see the context, we took the eastern wall, the wall that faces this campus we were creating, and painted it more lively so that it became a sort of a interior expression or back wall for the little buildings that were going to be built around against it as a stage set. And the back side is left very low key so that it blends in the neighborhood and doesn't push get pushy about being there. I think this model on the right-hand side has just visited England before I did. In some show, I don't know if you saw it, but that was the early study, and the building on the left is built pretty much that way. The stairways are the required stairways that, instead of keeping them internal, I used those as the decoration for the main building, spilling them out so that there would be activity on that wall when students go to and from classes. The upper 2 floors are the faculty offices, the second floor is the administration, the ground floor are all the student activities. And it's just a steel building, stucco, and the columns are wrapped with galvanized metal. This is the phase 2. The classrooms are made somewhat to look like courthouses. There are a total of 16 columns. There's 2 on this side, 4 on the other side, 4 over there, 3, maybe there's 15. So that when postmodernism is over, we can just tear those down. The little building, the round one is the with the round end is the chapel, which looks very Catholic these days. It used to look not so Catholic, but because the campus is mostly Jewish, even though it's a Jesuit college. But since it is a Jesuit college, the only way I could get the design approved was to make it look more Catholic. So it does. And it's going to be plywood, finished, and it'll have to be oiled regularly. And recently we discovered this pre-finished plywood that comes from Finland. That's the color on the right-hand side. And it seems like that it was just a few bucks extra and we could get a better material, so we're using that. The interiors are indirect light, although the major part of the interiors were done by somebody else after we did the shell. Somebody related to the board of directors needed a job. This is a charrette problem that was done for Kalamazoo, Michigan, with several architects participating, one of them being Stanley Tigerman, the other Bob Stern, and the young lady from Atlanta, Merrill Elam. The problem was to bring housing back to downtown Kalamazoo, Michigan. And they didn't need to bring much housing back to downtown Kalamazoo, Michigan by their economic surveys. They only needed to bring about 300 houses back to Kalamazoo, Michigan to create the proper mix so that there was life in the downtown. There was enormous parking lots and abandoned industrial buildings in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And there was a little creek here where you see the little houses. And so our proposal was to dam up the creek at some point and cover the parking lot with 2 inches of water and make a causeway so the arrow comes, that's the entry into Kalamazoo, Michigan. And then build a stepped parking garage against the historical section. That red building is a Louis Sullivan building. It's the most reverential piece in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And that's where people are going, and there's no need for the parking in that area that we're going to make as a lake because it's too far from the activity. So we proposed a step parking garage. And Kalamazoo has lots of nice little houses like this, and it already had a park, which was the nicest thing there, which had a bit of a lake in the middle, and it had some individual, a church, a library, all very different architectural expressions stepped around it. So I took that idea and carried it further and made Lake Kalamazoo with a causeway and proposed building those small vernacular houses, replicating them as iconic objects sitting on the step parking garage and on pedestals around the lake. And there's the creek, or the water source goes through underground through this industrial section, and I proposed opening it up and building more of those little houses inside the shells of the old industrial buildings, much like I was planning to do in New York. That brown thing there is a monument to Bob Stern. It's the stern of a ship sinking. And then there's a tiger man over there. We had 10 students that none of us ever met before, and we each got 10 students that we'd never met before, except Tigerman, who brought all 10 of his own students from Chicago. And there you can see the bleachers with the little houses sitting around. It was quite a nice idea. And then this is a high-rise hotel that resembles a fish. And then the log cabin. So I used all my tricks in one, place. We only had a few days, and that's what you do. This is also a project never to be built. It's a study, very cursory in a sense. It didn't go beyond this, for an office building for the Screen Actors Guild, for people like Charlton Heston and the like. All those people that want to become president next. And they do. And it had to be a retaining wall for on the site. Behind it is a huge hill, which you can see an outline profile with the trees on it. And so the building became like a buttress, and it was economical to create those courts. And the courts are really the parking garage, the stepping of the parking garage, which is in the building. The ground floor on the front is commercial, and then the intention was to put restaurants up in there. And those little houses are just, they're out of scale. They're just pieces we pirated from another model. But you get a sense of the idea. And this is in line with our very straight work. It's a shell for an Art Deco theater in Oakland, which is not going to be built. It's a demountable shell to be made in wood. I do a lot of work in the concert hall area, which I find very exciting and keeps me interested in acoustics and things like that. But here we had to do a shell that would be up only for 2 weeks of the year for when the orchestra played. And it was a friend of mine was the conductor, Calvin Simmons, who some of you may know, was killed in an accident, and so this is not going ahead. And I'm shudder to show this. This is my proposal for the Beverly Hills Civic Center competition, which the winners, Charles Moore, and it's in the other room so you can see it. I carried forward the idea of this sculptural idealism, not trying to mimic a European space, public space, tried to take the individual parts and make them more discrete and set them around as landscape elements, and trying to harmonize with the scale, so that in that photo on the right there are a lot of existing buildings in the background, and it's all intended that the scale would come together, and this would be a kind of an experience that you would walk through and use differently than, because Americans tend not to use squares or open spaces like you do here. They spend more time in their automobiles. This, I got myself into a little trouble trying to explore the Baroque of the old City Hall and make a concert hall as a bridge that crossed the street. And it's been described in Archetype magazine, a magazine that comes out in San Francisco, as a proposal that's similar to a miniature golf course. I like that one. I proposed a museum, you see, with an Ed Ruscha mural, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I suppose our renderings upset the jurors and the city fathers. I know they upset me when I saw them. It made it look like we were making fun of Beverly Hills, and I think probably I was. This is a house I designed in 1959. So you see, I can do that. I can do that kind of fancy detailing. Frank Lloyd Wright, Harwell Harris were my influences here. I did that drawing. And it's for sale at Max Program. 1979, some people bought this house for 10 times what it was built for, including the fees. And searched out the original architect because they liked the quality of light in the building. And came to me and asked me if I would design an addition to this house. I'm in the process of making individual buildings that are individual rooms as individual buildings. And I've just been through my chain link and corrugated metal period. And I say to them, but I don't do this anymore, like this. And I send them off to look at everything I've done to make sure they realize what they're about to get into. And they come back and tell me not to worry. They realize the quality of light in all the new buildings was, I carried that forward. I learned how to do it better, in fact, and if I didn't have to use chain link and corrugated metal, they would be very happy. They wanted me to do something that was as far out as I can go. They egged me on. They told me, just have at it, make it wonderful. And so this is the plan of the original house, which is quite structured along a corridor and rooms off of it, with a projecting living room and the entry through a courtyard past the garage. On the right-hand side is what's built up around the house. That low concrete block wall, the squares, is the entry into a long driveway that takes you back to that one. But as you come through it, you come through all that collage of styles and so on. So I used that as an example and then proceeded to design now a kitchen, family room, bathroom, service room, master bedroom, master bath, around a garden room that extended the corridor in the original house. And there's a sculpture representation that was supposed to be a fish. The family room is the log cabin, and after a few meetings it became obvious that my client didn't like the log cabin. We had to change that, but otherwise they were very pleased with the house, and they continued to encourage me to explore my fantasies, which I did. The right-hand slide is of the Danziger building, one of the first ones I showed you, and the connection of that was there, and you don't come up with many new ideas, I guess. I brought it because I recognized it was the same idea, only consciously more awkward here, of joining different parts and connecting separate objects. And so the family room became a stucco box and a tile kitchen, and then the little service room was metal. And as you came in the driveway, you came in on the axis of the white family room with the fish sculpture, and then the next to it is the a replica, 6 foot high or maybe 12, I guess it's 12 foot high replica of my drawing for the Chicago Tribune Born Again competition that Stanley Tigerman did. He was mad at me that I didn't do a beautiful drawing for it. I just sent in a sketch, and so I was trying to repair my error by building it in full size, which never happened, or in model size, rather large size. Anyway, that's the bathroom and the family room, and etc. And then there's a connection between the two buildings. And so it was kind of making a village, but using what was happening in the neighborhood of the conglomeration of pieces, building on the ideas that I'd already been exploring of designing each room as a separate object, and then trying to fit it into this program for the site and for the budget. We couldn't decide whether to put the eagle or the fish in front of which. The bedroom, the master bedroom, was made out of plywood, and I was exploring the idea of making that building look like a piece of furniture, which is what I was doing on the little chapel for the Loyola College. This building came in on budget, and it was sent into the Bel Air Association, which is a small group that approves buildings for this neighborhood, and it was rejected as something that didn't fit into the neighborhood. That was overcomable, actually. I'm talking to them, they backed off of that, but somehow the client decided not to build it, and so they went and hired an architect to do the addition in the style of my 1959 house. I think this is probably one of the best things I've ever done. It's been my own impression of it, and it was very difficult to lose it, not have it built. It's continuing the wood studs, that vocabulary that I developed in the other projects. So that would be covered in glass, as in my house, and would create a garden room that connected the parts. In Oklahoma City, we were asked to do a shopping center, which is the low part here, and it had a parking garage. And then this was an all-star team: I.M. Pei, Philip Johnson, Aldo Jirgala. The meetings were wonderful. Pei got to build his building, which is the one on the right, and Philip is going to build the building, the big one on the left. I think Pei was then fired, and Jirgala was then fired, and somebody else. But I remained in and got to build the parking garage there. And then nestled between the Pei building and a building, another one by a Texas office, there's an existing brick building, this red one, and that was to be torn down. And since my part of the project wasn't going to get built, the client called me and asked if I would do a study for a 15-story tower for that corner. And the problem was to link it so that it became the future entrance on a diagonal into the shopping center that may or may never be built, but it had to relate to that future. And so my solution was to take the ideas of the house that I showed you in the slides just before this and try to carry that idea into a high-rise tower by making a kind of campanile on the corner out of glass, and then a more solid building with a courtyard and creating that diagonal back. Now, this is as far as it went. The architecture you see on these models are just not designed in any way. It's just punched holes to represent a more solid building next to a campanile-like glass thing. And on this left-hand slide, the far right building is the one that Philip is doing. I'm not sure. It was problematic for me. Maybe lucky that it's not going ahead right away. It's been delayed for a couple of years. And I was having problems with taking that vocabulary from the small house and just moving it up in scale. So it's a problem doing that, although there's some interesting ideas here. Johnson himself is doing a big project in Boston that has some of the characteristics of this, that he's taken and broken down a large-scale project into several small building parts connected, much like this idea. Although I don't think it's as refined as it could be in his case. In other words, I don't like it. This is another building I've been accused not of never showing, but it's again a study. We get some of these projects and you take them to keep the office going, God knows, and you take them as far as you can, and so they're not representative to me of the best work I'm doing, and so I tend to not talk about them. Except in this case, it leads to another project that comes out of this, the vocabulary, and is maybe interesting for students to see. This is the existing building on the left, which had not much going for it. We were building a top floor for a film maker, the Goldwyn Company, and we were able to increase the floor area by expanding the wall out and create a kind of an overhang in stucco. And it was a very tight budget. And the model on the left and the reality on the right. I have some problems with it if you don't, but there are some techniques in the stucco that were interesting to me that we were able to now use continuing. And the back end of it, I like the way those pieces were able to hang out and be perched up there. This is the project that again, a rooftop, so it relates to the other project, building that our client bought and asked us to design a penthouse for, and for which we're not supposed to do anything to the bottom. They're going to do that. We're just doing the top, and so the idea was to build this is similar to that other house, separate rooms that are connected like a village on the roof. And these were the first study models. The owner is very involved with Art Deco. She's an artist, and her father, and mother, who are also involved. And this is not a house to be used the year round. They come to Los Angeles from Vancouver for a couple of months at a time, and they come separately. The daughter comes independent with the rest of the family, so that the house had to relate to the ideas and fantasies of each of those members of the family. And they brought in, this was one of those cases where the client brought in just hundreds of photographs from Architectural Digest and so on. And I pinned them up on the wall, and this first model was a fantasy of a response to all their pictures, in which I showed them how they could have everything they wanted. And these were study models on the way to that. And in all white, it went through its Richard Meyer period. We lost this connection to the floor below. That was obliterated for costs. And then this separate objects, a studio, and essentially the pink thing is a staircase down to the lower floor. The front, the blue object is the kitchen, and the rest is the living room. The little step shape is a TV space that's darkened in the main space. And this is all studio. And then the owner brought in her fantasies on top of my building for her notions about Art Deco and tile and so on, and proceeded to increase the budget by two or more than 2 times for these kind of finishes. Now, what you see is my attempt to absorb that into my design, and it's a very agonizing period. I'm showing you this house in the most agonizing time for myself, in that I'm not sure whether I'm winning or not. The people want the bottom building pink, so that's a given. And there it is under construction. So we're in construction, and these bottom things are sort of in a state of flux, I hope. We're dealing with them, but and it's all in the final cosmetic. It's the whole building is exactly as I wanted it, except for the finishes. And the blue is the way I want it, and the metal is the way I want it. I didn't want the pink. I'm dealing with it. I'm in pain. I like the black. I like the green. I'm not sure about the marble. This is where it is. That's all I can say right now. The fireplace is a figure tile I'm working on. Here you can see the character of the space from the living room, where you'll see the dome and the step form. The step form will be made in metal like an automobile. It'll be finished like an automobile, smooth, and it'll be painted black, and the dome will be blue, and God knows what else everything else will be. But it's good to get away and sort of deal with these issues from afar. I think this trip is very helpful for me for this project. And back to sanity. In New Orleans, next to Charles Moore. Charles Moore is doing a project for the New Orleans World's Fair that's called Wonder Wall. It's 2,000 feet of wall that looks like it came out of a French fairy tale. It's probably going to be, I think, don't you, Charlie, one of the best things he's done since Sea Ranch? No? Charlie doesn't think? No. I think it's fantastic. That wall attaches to this building. I'm doing the amphitheater. These are all temporary structures for the 1984 World's Fair. And Charlie's has one of those piazza, like the Piazza d'Italia, except instead of columns, he has mermaids doing unnatural acts with alligators. And I have a bridge connecting to that piazza that I haven't made it yet, but it's going to look like a wasp flying away. And it attaches itself to this thing, which has a skin that looks like a fish. And it's on the river. The river edge is right on the right-hand slide, it's right to the edge. And this piece sits in the middle of an existing structure, so that's why you see all this stuff around it. And it's a working dock, and we got carried away with the New Orleans sky. The roof is plastic, and it will be done in a fish scale pattern like the thing I did with the bridge project with Richard Serra. It seats 6,000 people. It's under construction, too. Thank God. This is the water side, and the intention is that they'll sail a big ship up to here, and they'll drop a gangplank, and Frank Sinatra will go through that opening and appear on stage. And this is a house in Connecticut. I'm not Connecticut. I don't even know where I am. It's in Minnesota, Wayzata, near Minneapolis. And that house on the left is a Philip Johnson house from the 50s. It's a brick house with a courtyard. And we were asked to design a guest house for it, for grandchildren. Come and visit the parents. And after we got permission from Philip that it was okay to intercede or build this thing next to his house, you have to do that and be polite, right? I chose to put our project on the other side of the hedge so you wouldn't see it. So you would only see it from down in the garden from the lakeside, and they would appear as two objects independently and not unrelated, except with this line between them. And the idea was to take the house that wasn't going to be built in Los Angeles, that idea, which I showed to these people and they liked, and give them and the tract house and all those ideas coming together, give them a starter set of 2 or 3 of the buildings, which could be added to as their grandchildren numbers increased. They have 9 original children, so one presumes that most of them will get married and have children, and this could become a hotel eventually. And this is as far as this one is developed at this point. I doubt if we'll end up with castles and things, but it was exploring that fantasy idea for the children, that these lower boxes would be like almost like a hotel room, a bedroom with a secret stair up to a loft, so that the individual parent groups would come and bring their kids, and they would have a great place to remember grandparents from or with or whatever. More fish. This is color core Formica. Had a competition, which some of you may know about or heard about, and they invited a few guests to make proposals. Color core is like Formica, only it's solid color all the way through, and they were excited about it being now they could make a solid object with this material. And I couldn't find much to do with it that was interesting to me until I started breaking it. It shattered and looked like flints that you find in an Indian burial mound. And I then got the idea to make a fish with it, which, strangely enough, the fish popped into mine. And the only color was this yellow that was translucent like this. So we made a fish in that stand, and now the final fish is changed, and it's going to have a stand like that one on the right. And there's the original fish, which I didn't think was, the snout of which I wasn't very happy with, so we spent 2 more weeks making that one at great expense, breaking those things, and made them. So that's the fish that will be publicly shown, and this one will regress to somewhere. It's for sale too. there you can see a close-up of the breaking of the material, which is, and using it kind of like flagstone. It's interesting. And more fish. Hauserman, the people that own Sunar showrooms, asked me to design a workstation that's going to fit in a Isosaki showroom in Chicago for Neocon in June. And they gave me that material, which is metal with a thin wafer of metal with plaster in between, and asked me to just have fun with it and make a thing. Well, I got all involved and made this sort of office system of bolted panels that looks like a garden structure. We even made a funny little garden chair, an old-fashioned one out of it. That stand with the fish, the brown fish, is actually the fish you just saw is going to be here, I found out. So, and then Iso's ceiling in this room is a plastic ceiling which is lit, a lighted ceiling, and so we're making a fish reflector on the top of our with mirrored scale, so it'll reflect his ceiling. And
this is a house that's under construction, again in Venice Beach, for a film screenwriter, who, when he was a child or a young man, was a lifeguard, and he always fantasized that he would have a studio where he could write that would be like that on the right-hand side. He bought the lot that's just in front of that brown building with the big hatches, diagonal hatches, wood siding, and we designed the house to sit against that, which has the studio like a lifeguard tower. It sits out on the front, and it's just terraces and rooms, using a lot of the vocabulary that we'd already developed. And this staircase, which I realized is a sort of a model of a building I did in 1972. And that form came back in this building. It's interesting how those things come back to haunt you. But the green would be tile, and the blue would be tile. And there's the platform for the lifeguard station. And it's all about stairs and terraces and so on. Built in the style that this house will blend into the community. You won't even notice it's anything different. It'll look like it's been there for years. The little studio has degenerated into a monster that looks like it's going to bite you, like the house next door. And finally, a project that's just starting construction. It's an aerospace museum in a park in Los Angeles, which has a rose garden. And number 5 is a rose garden, and a heavy, large rectangle next to it called the Armory is an existing building you see on the right. And at this lower end, where the word Armory is written, is the portion where you see this giant missile. This street will be closed and made into a pedestrian way. That missile goes out, and that's where we build our building, attached to the Armory. So our building, the intention is that our building, which is small and $3.5 million, is a starter set for this aerospace museum, to use it as to create excitement, and as they gave the project to me, and to evoke images of the aerospace industry, and to be used to generate funds so that they can redo the whole Armory and finally make that whole complex the Aerospace Museum. So we were the starter set. And this is the beginnings of it. It's 10,000 square foot footprint, and it goes up to 90 and 100 feet high in the center, 75 to 80 feet high on the wings. It's one big room. with inside a elevator and stairway piece, and you walk in behind the building. You come in to a space between the two, so that eventually the entry will become coherent with the other building. And you walk in past that yellow object into a space that spreads out in two directions. We had done, I show this as a back reference. I'm looking through the slides. I noticed that it's an embassy we designed for Damascus, Syria. And we were fired because they thought we were too frivolous with this building. I thought it was perfectly straightforward, but the State Department didn't like it. But it has some reference to both Loyola, where I cut through a building, cracked it apart, and in the center, and the aerospace. I don't know what that means. Maybe it means that's the only idea I have. But the interior of the Aerospace Museum is for planes and missiles and what have you to be hung in the space from the rafters. And these were study models on the way to the final design. On the right-hand side, you see a platform with missiles on it. That was a proposal we made for a missile garden, and the box behind it is a theater, an IMAX theater. And the same committee that hired us and loves what we're doing and supported this, for some reason decided to use another architect named O.K. Earl to design the missile garden and the IMAX theater, which is okay with me, but O.K. Earl has proposed a garden for the missiles in which there are little benches and flowers, and something I wouldn't, I mean, that kind of spoofing of the missiles I wouldn't dare have done, much as I would have agreed with it. So I'm very excited that this man has managed to far exceed my fondest wishes for a missile garden, doing something I could never had the guts to do. That's the final design. The gray portion is galvanized metal lapped and painted, and as is the dark green. The white part is stucco, and that is a full-size airplane intended to hang off the outside and look like it's strafing the street. You'll walk up, you'll enter through a ramp. The California laws on handicapped access have become quite strong, and I think rightfully so, and it becomes much more prudent now to design all the entrances as ramps, and you get rid of the stairs, and it's much simpler, and I think it's quite nice, and I'm very happy it's happened, because everything now is entered by, you get these beautiful ramp forms to build around your buildings. That's how you will perceive it as it is on the right. That big building comes out behind. This is, you'll never see this elevation because it's in that narrow street. But and that's how you'll enter the space. So you'll come into this building that seems to be inside the building. Again, that idea, but it's partly out. And it's the elevator and stairways that and ramps and so on that take you around inside. I don't know what the ball is on top. And then finally, no, not finally yet. I'm very excited about the roofscape of this. We just before I left, we came in $3,000 under the budget, and so it was approved by the governor, and they're starting to build it. And then finally, my failure, my client is in the audience, Charles Jencks, who has a notion about that one can hire artists and friends and architects to do projects by giving them an iconic program. And so I guess I proceeded to prove him wrong. Maybe I was being nasty, Charlie. I'm not sure. I thought I was. Anyway, I put everything I ever thought of into this, trying to meet his iconic program, which was a Milton poem. Had to do with what's her name? Phyllis. Phyllis, who was a rustic. And so the wood studs are the rustic, and there's a bear up in the pediment, and there's an eagle and a snake, and the Warsaw freedom symbol up there. And that thing on the left, we were trying to make a centaur out of it, but didn't turn out very well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's a hard act to follow or comment on. I was fascinated by one moment in the evening you said, it's hard to tell when you're winning. How do you tell when you're winning? And it seems to me one can't tell them whether you're winning or losing unless you can classify it.
Get him!
So I thought, well, Philip Johnson said he would copy everybody. He'd copy Mies, Coeur, alto, late alto, but he would never dare copy Frank Gehry. And I think the reason is that he couldn't classify him. And I think one can say that, in general, the better an architect is, the less classifiable he is. Nonetheless, we all keep trying. And I've decided that you're a not classicist. That much is clear. And
I think you're wrong.
Well,
I'm a closet classicist.
there is, in this game of one-downmanship, I was reminded, or I'm continuously reminded, of a little essay Harold Rosenberg wrote on American artists. And I think Frank, as a great friend of a lot of artists, is clearly, can be classified the way Harold Rosenberg classified the typical American artist. And he said, as opposed to the British or European artist, and he gave the instance of the American Revolution and the Redcoats, which of course every American, like Frank and myself, learns about. The Redcoats, like a good Cubist movement in modernist terms, come out with their guns. They're very good artillery. And all this theory of how to shoot and incredible geometric formations and far away. But Daniel Boone stands behind his trees, runs from one tree to another, and with his long-ranged rifle that he's fashioned together, picks them off one by one. So the typical American artist is a Daniel Boone, and I would now classify what Frank is doing as a kind of Daniel Boone-ism. Thank you very much, Frank.